Imagine mowing your lawn on a warm spring day, feeling on top of the world, only to overhear your wife casually mention her affair. I was happy, in love, and about to become a father. What would you do if your entire world came crashing down in a single conversation? What happens next will blow your mind. Late spring in Utah can throw some surprises your way. This May, it was especially warm and wet, a combination you don't usually see. By now, I'm typically mowing the lawn for the first time in early April, but not this season. At least it wasn't snowing like last year when we got hit with an 8-inch snowstorm around this time. I'll take an early start to mowing over dealing with snow any day. With tax season behind me, it felt great to finally step outside and soak up some sun. My backyard has a unique feature. It slopes steeply downhill, leading to a small stream nestled in the woods. When the house was built, they filled in the front yard to level it with the road, which left the side of the house with a sharp incline. The basement, which is entirely underground at the front, is fully exposed in the back. This allowed me to put in a set of double service doors, making it easy to store the lawnmower and tools in the basement instead of cluttering up the garage. That setup has always been one of my favorite things about this place. After I finished mowing, I put everything back in its place. I'm allergic to grass, so I was ready to head straight upstairs for a shower. I was almost at the top of the steps when I heard my wife's voice. I'd noticed her friend's car earlier while I was mowing out front, so it didn't surprise me that they were chatting. But then something in their conversation made me stop with my hand just shy of the door. Before I go any further, I should introduce myself. My name is John Matthews, but everyone just calls me John. Back in school, people used to call me Johnny, which I didn't mind, though the reference was lost on most since the TV show they got it from aired way before I was born. Anyway, I graduated from the University of Utah with a degree in accounting, and even then, some folks still called me Johnny. After that, I earned my CPA license as quickly as I could and landed a job with a big firm in Salt Lake City. I'm a team leader now, mostly handling audits and other similar work. It's not the most thrilling job, but the pay is fantastic, and I've gotten to see how a lot of businesses really operate. I've got a knack for forensic accounting, tracing money trails to uncover things like fraud and laundering. I've even been called in to help the FBI on a couple of cases, which is kind of a big deal. My wife, Sarah, was double majoring in political science and business when we met during our freshman year. I was sitting in class on the first day, waiting for it to start, when she walked in. Sarah had the kind of tall, lean build you'd expect from a dancer, with a little extra up top. Her long brown hair flowed loosely over her bare shoulders, and she was wearing a sundress that perfectly complemented her amazing legs. There was something about her, a mix of innocence and allure, that hit me hard right away. It took me a while to work up the nerve to talk to her. She didn't sit next to me, and she wasn't part of my group for class projects, so it wasn't easy. After about 4 weeks, I finally made a lame joke, and to my surprise, she laughed, a full, hearty laugh, not a polite chuckle. From there, we started chatting, and eventually, I asked if she wanted to grab coffee after class. She smiled and said, "I've been waiting 4 weeks for you to ask." For the last 2 years of college, we were practically inseparable. Our parents weren't thrilled when we decided to move in together during senior year, but they came around when they saw how serious we were. Life just kept getting better after that. I graduated and got hired right away by one of the big accounting firms in Salt Lake City, earning more money than I ever imagined at 23. Sarah got accepted into the University of Utah Law School, so we stayed in our student apartment. My firm even paid for me to go back for an MBA. I didn't need a car because I could just ride the light rail to work, which saved us a ton of money. 3 years after we both graduated, Sarah earned her law degree, and I proposed to her during a birthday dinner at an upscale steakhouse in downtown Salt Lake City. 6 months later, we were married. Sarah accepted a job as a deputy district attorney with the Salt Lake County DA's office, and we decided to buy a house in Sandy, not far from her parents' place. It was the perfect starter home, a 3-bedroom setup. One of the bedrooms was set up as an office with 2 desks, since I sometimes worked from home, and Sarah needed a space of her own for her legal work. The second bedroom was reserved as a guest room, and the third, of course, became our master bedroom. Sarah even convinced me that it was the perfect spot for a future nanny, once we had kids. I grew up as an only child, and I always wished I had siblings. From the time we were freshmen in college, Sarah and I had talked about having kids one day. We agreed to wait until her career was on solid ground before we started trying. Now, we'd finally hit that moment. Just 2 nights ago, we agreed it was time to stop Sarah's birth control and start trying for a baby. I had never been happier in my life. Then I heard something that made me freeze, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "John and I decided it's time for me to get pregnant," Sarah said with a burst of excitement. Her friend, Anna Stevens, was thrilled to hear it, and both women let out high-pitched squeals that reminded me of the sounds whales make when they accidentally beach themselves on the Oregon coast. Standing there on the stairs, I grinned, sharing in their excitement about becoming parents. But just as I reached for the door again, I overheard something that drained the smile from my face and the joy right out of me. "This is fantastic news, Sarah," Anna said, "but what about Rick, the florist?" Sarah quickly reassured her. "John's outside mowing the lawn." There was a pause. I could almost picture her scanning the area, checking to see if I might be nearby. Then she added, "I already told Rick I'm ending things." He understood. Once Rick steps down from his Senate run, he thinks he's got a real shot at higher office. Being exposed for having an affair with a married employee would ruin everything. In those 3 sentences, my entire world shattered. Rick Foster was Sarah's boss at the DA's office. He was a 47-year-old widower. His wife, Karen, passed away from breast cancer, leaving him to raise their daughter, Lisa, on his own. Rick was the very definition of a political mover and shaker, always plotting his next career step, and Sarah had shared plenty of stories about his ambitions to climb higher up the political ladder. Well, now I knew how my wife had access to all that inside information. "Are you serious?" Anna asked, just like that. "Cold turkey. You've been hot and heavy for 6 months, and now you're just walking away from it." The teasing tone in her voice made me want to storm in there and tear her apart. I'd known Anna since our days at Utah State. She had been my friend before Sarah's, and even though they had become best friends over the years, I always assumed she still had some loyalty to me. Clearly, I was wrong about that. "Stop it, seriously," Sarah said, giggling. "You're terrible. Rick was amazing in bed, but it was just rough fun. I love John, but Rick just took control, you know. There was no love, just pure, raw sex and power. But now that John and I are going to have a baby, I don't want to risk anything. I love John, and I'll be a good wife and a faithful mother." How many more clichés can one person say in a single conversation? I wondered to myself. The only thing missing now is for me to walk in and catch them in the act with some strange car parked in the driveway. I wanted to burst through that door, scream at the top of my lungs, tear the room apart. But I couldn't. I was frozen in place, completely paralyzed, my muscles refusing to move. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest, I could hear it in my ears. "So, cold turkey?" Anna pressed, and Sarah's giggle followed soon after. "Well, not exactly cold turkey," she admitted. "Next week, I've got a conference with Rick in Seattle. We'll have our little farewell fling there. I'll miss the excitement, but John and the baby are what really matter." I couldn't take it anymore, but I was at a complete loss. I loved Sarah, but this was eating me alive. My business instincts started kicking in. I needed to step back, clear my head, and come up with a plan. I stomped up the stairs like I was scaling Mount Everest, each step heavier than the last, before opening the door and stepping into the kitchen. Sarah and Anna were sitting at the table, sipping tea. Was that a flicker of guilt in Sarah's eyes? "Babe, are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. That's when I realized my face was streaked with tears. "Allergies," I mumbled. "It's going to be a tough spring." "Well, why don't you head upstairs and grab a shower? Just leave your clothes near the bathroom door, and I'll toss them in the wash so they don't mess up your closet. I bought you a new pack of Claritin D last week. It's in the medicine cabinet," she added with a smile. "Thanks," I said quietly, making my way to the stairs. I needed space, time to think. The next morning, Thursday, I used an early meeting as an excuse to get out of the house before Sarah even woke up. The night before, I claimed my allergies were bothering me and went to bed early, trying to keep my emotions in check. Sitting on the train, my mind kept drifting back to the conversation I'd overheard. On one hand, my wife had been unfaithful, but now she was ready to end the affair to stay with me and have our child. Some people might say I should just let it go, be grateful she was coming back to the marriage, planning to be a good wife and mother. But there was this nagging voice in my head that kept asking, if she did it once, what's to stop her from doing it again? 10 years down the road, after the kids start school, would she find herself in another affair? And then what? A messy divorce where Sarah would likely get the kids, and I'd be stuck with child support payments. As an accountant and business analyst, I've always thought in terms of risk versus reward. I found myself doing the same here. My trust in Sarah was completely shattered. The whole "it was just physical" excuse missed the bigger picture. It wasn't about the sex, it was about the total lack of respect for me. She knew what she was doing was wrong, and she knew it would hurt me. If she didn't, she would have done it out in the open, and I'd have known about it from the start. Don't get me wrong, I don't think I could ever have accepted her sleeping with Rick, but at least if she'd had the decency to talk to me about it, it would have shown some level of respect. Sarah's actions revealed exactly how little she respected me. I tried to focus on work, but part of my mind was consumed by what I should do next. I didn't have any hard evidence, just that overheard conversation. I hadn't noticed anything different over the past 6 months while this affair was going on. Confronting her without proof would be a huge risk with almost no chance of success. She'd deny everything, and Rick would back her up. Taking this through the courts would be financial suicide. Rick Foster had connections, every judge, lawyer, and politician in the surrounding counties knew him. I'd get buried just to keep his name clean. I considered just packing up and leaving, starting fresh somewhere else. The idea was tempting, but the house was like an anchor around my neck. Sarah couldn't afford it on her salary, and we had almost no equity. She'd have to sell it almost immediately to avoid foreclosure, and in this market, that wasn't likely. It would tank both of our credit scores. Being a CPA with a bad credit rating isn't exactly the best look when you're trying to land a new job. Who's going to trust you with their money when you can't manage your own? I knew I needed solid evidence before I could take any action, but I hadn't found anything yet. That is, until the most unexpected source delivered it right into my lap. 3 days went by, and I kept my cool, though I hadn't uncovered a single shred of proof to back up what I had overheard. Her personal laptop was spotless, no secret email accounts, no hidden lingerie stashed away in a closet, and no suspicious receipts from places she shouldn't have been. Absolutely nothing. Then Sarah called me at work and mentioned that we were invited to a political announcement party at Rick Foster's place on Friday night. I figured this was his big reveal, likely announcing his candidacy for a U.S. Senate seat. I had been hoping for some grand moment to confront her, but I still didn't have any hard evidence. Damn it. We arrived just in time for the big announcement. Foster's mansion near Provo was massive, complete with a small horse farm out back. A huge tent had been set up for all the guests, and as soon as we walked in, there was the man himself, Rick Foster, standing at the front of the reception line like some kind of king. Being a widower, Foster didn't have a wife to play hostess, but his 23-year-old daughter had clearly been recruited for the role. She stood beside him, welcoming guests like she'd been doing it her whole life. When it was our turn, Foster's grin widened as he saw Sarah and exclaimed, "Sarah, you did it. How wonderful." He gave my wife a quick, chaste kiss on the cheek. Then he turned to me and said, "John, it's good to see you again. I don't know what I'd do without your wife's help, but I hear I may have to give her up soon, what with you expanding your family and all." He chuckled at his own joke. "Just make sure to send her back when you're done with her. No hard feelings." More laughter. Sarah even blushed a little, and it took every ounce of self-control not to strangle this smug bastard on the spot. I caught the underlying message loud and clear, though he seemed to think it flew right over my head. Who knows what the future holds? I replied in an even, neutral tone, not angry, but certainly not friendly. It was the same tone I used when delivering audit results. Foster's smile faltered slightly, and Sarah nudged me in the ribs, muttering something about being rude. Foster quickly turned his attention to the next guest, leaving us to make awkward small talk with his daughter. Now, Sarah is an attractive woman, no doubt about it, but Rick's daughter, Lisa, was stunning. Even in the midst of my rage, I couldn't help but notice her. With her blonde hair and dazzling smile, she reminded me of a young Grace Kelly. If Sarah had the elegant build of a ballerina, Lisa had the kind of beauty you'd expect to see on the cover of a swimsuit calendar, right next to Kate Upton. She had the looks, the figure, and the kind of skin and hair that photographers dream about and usually need Photoshop to create. Foster had crafted the perfect political image, a triple threat of a family. He fit the bill of the wise statesman and family man, while the memory of his late wife, who died from cancer, made her a saint in the public eye. Any political opponent who dared criticize her would be committing career suicide. And Lisa? She was the PR dream. A business and law major at Utah State, former gymnast, current cheerleader. Sarah had mentioned that Lisa planned to try out for the Broncos cheerleading squad now that she'd turned 23. With a late, saintly wife and a brilliant, beautiful daughter, Foster was the media's dream candidate. "John," Lisa said, practically squealing as she pulled me into a tight hug. This wasn't one of those polite, quick hugs you give someone at a party. No, this was a full-body embrace, and parts of her pressed against me in a way that was more than a little pleasant. "You look great. No wonder Sarah's been keeping you all to herself. You never come to any of our parties. You've got to stop working so hard, it's not good for your health." She said all of this in one breath, her words tumbling out faster than I could process them. My anger gave way to shock. I stammered a few polite words about how stunning she looked and was just about to make my exit when two things hit me. First, Lisa hadn't greeted Sarah, and second, what kind of parties was she talking about? Before I had a chance to ask, Sarah jumped in with her own greeting to Lisa, and we quickly had to move aside to let the next guests through the line. As Sarah and I made our way through the party, I couldn't stop wondering, what exactly did Lisa know? After pouring Sarah a drink, I casually asked, what parties was Lisa talking about? She just smirked and brushed it off with a little snort. "Oh, she's just teasing. The brat. Rick occasionally hosts team meetings and strategy sessions here. Says he thinks better with a drink in his hand, and bars aren't the best place for privacy. You never know who's sitting in the next booth. Lisa was home a few times when we met here. Don't tell anyone, but Rick let her have a drink at home before she turned 23. That set my mind racing. This guy probably had his affair with my wife right here in his own home, all under the guise of these so-called team meetings. Hell, they might have even been real meetings, with Sarah sticking around after everyone else had left. Or maybe she left first and came back once the others were gone. That way, the legal team wouldn't question why Sarah was always the last to help him clean up. With his wife gone and his daughter away at college most of the time, there was no need for some seedy hotel room. No paper trail, no receipts. So, Lisa attended these team meetings too? I asked, trying to sound casual. Sarah waved off the question like it was nothing. Oh, no, she was just home a few times when her classes got cancelled. She's just teasing her dad about partying during work hours. She grabbed my hand and smiled. Come on, sweetie, buy your young wife a drink. For the next hour, Sarah stayed glued to my side. We mingled with some of her coworkers, and almost everyone mentioned how happy they were for us and our plans to have a baby, even though they'd miss Sarah while she was out. I'll be honest, I felt a little uncomfortable. Why did all these people know about our plans? About an hour later, Rick Foster gathered everyone's attention. Lisa stood beside him, smiling like the perfect political daughter. Rick thanked everyone for coming before diving into his big announcement. It was what everyone expected, but the excitement in the room was still palpable. I noticed a couple of local reporters taking notes, and I knew there'd be a big article in tomorrow's paper. I won't bore you with the rest of the party details. It would have been a nice evening if my heart wasn't in pieces and my mind wasn't spinning, trying to figure out how to prove what I already knew. Roughly an hour and a half after Rick's speech, Margaret Williams, the first assistant district attorney, walked over and mentioned that Rick wanted to meet with his staff. While Rick was the elected official, Margaret was the one who truly ran the office. She was a tough, no-nonsense woman, but she was also highly respected in the legal community for her honesty and integrity. In fact, Margaret was one of the main reasons Sarah had accepted the position. I liked Margaret a lot. She'd been married for over 30 years to an electrician who'd put her through law school. Now, he owned a successful electrical contracting business. They were completely devoted to each other, and I'd always admired them as role models for Sarah and me. Sorry for stealing your wife, John, Margaret said with a smile. Rick wants to talk about how we'll keep the office running smoothly while he's out campaigning. A moment later, she and Sarah left to join the others. I wandered away from the small group of other spouses lingering near the meeting and made my way to the far side of the pool. Across from the patio, there was a wicker swing hanging from chains. It sat in the shadows, visible enough that people could see me if they looked, but tucked away enough that I wouldn't draw attention. It seemed like the perfect spot to try and gather my thoughts. I hadn't been sitting there for more than 5 minutes when a voice broke through the quiet. So, this is where you're hiding, the voice purred. I looked up to see Lisa sliding into the wicker swing beside me. She positioned herself so that she was facing me, her little black dress clinging to her tanned hips, revealing just enough of her figure to be both seductive and innocent at the same time. It's a testament to my state of mind that I noted this in an almost detached, academic way. You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, Lisa commented, her voice soft yet probing. The last thing I wanted was to spill my troubles to the daughter of my wife's lover, no matter how attractive she was. We've been swamped at the office. Lots of audits going on, I said, keeping things as neutral as possible. Is that right? Lisa asked, genuinely curious. I just wrapped up my final accounting course at school. We covered forensic accounting in law enforcement a bit, and I thought it was fascinating. Even through my internal turmoil, I was surprised. Really? I asked, raising an eyebrow. It's not glamorous or anything, she admitted with a shrug, but it's like being a detective. You piece together the right information from a mess of unrelated details to figure out the bigger picture. And since some people go out of their way to hide things, it makes the job even more challenging. Most people wouldn't think so, I said, a little amused. Lisa dove into a detailed explanation of what she had learned in class and why she found it so engaging. I have to admit, I was impressed. I've met interns finishing their stints at firms who couldn't explain the topic half as well. Listening to her helped me shove aside both her looks and, more importantly, the anger bubbling up inside me. For a moment, I felt more like a mentor, and that role gave me a brief reprieve from the emotional storm I was navigating. You clearly enjoyed the course, I remarked. It sounds like you've really mastered the subject. Lisa blushed at the compliment, and for a moment, the pin-up girl persona disappeared, replaced by a sweet, genuine girl clearly touched by the praise. "I've actually thought about joining the FBI after I graduate," she confided. "Dad wants me to go into law, either become a prosecutor or work at one of his friends' firms. But I don't think that's for me." "You should follow your own path, not someone else's," I said sincerely, not minding the idea of derailing Rick's plans. "I've worked with the FBI on a few occasions when audits uncovered something criminal. Sharp people, for sure." Before Lisa could respond, Sarah stepped out of the shadows with a teasing grin. "So, this is where you disappeared to. You two weren't up to anything indecent, were you?" she joked. Lisa turned toward Sarah, smiling brightly. "We were just talking about John's work. We covered this in one of my classes, so I wanted to hear an expert's take." "Well, John's definitely the man for that," Sarah said proudly. "I remember one of his audit reports where an employee was embezzling funds using his boss's login. John figured out that some of the transfers happened while the guy was on a business trip, but the login came from the corporate office. Most of us would have stopped once the boss was implicated, but John kept digging. I could have secured a conviction against that employee on my first day as a prosecutor. John left almost nothing for the prosecution to do." She glanced at me with admiration as she shared the story. I was completely baffled. How could she speak about me with so much pride and claim to love me while she'd been having a 6-month affair with her boss? A flicker of confusion must have shown on my face because Sarah asked, "What's wrong, honey?" "Nothing," I lied. "Just thinking about work." "Well, stop thinking about work, it's a party," Sarah scolded, playfully nudging me. Barely taking a breath, she continued excitedly, "John, you'll never guess the opportunity one was just given. Dave and Margaret want me to handle some administrative tasks as I prepare for maternity leave. That way, when I'm gone, there won't be any loose ends. I'll be reporting directly to Margaret." For a brief moment, hope flared in my chest at the thought of Sarah working under Margaret and being away from Rick. But just as quickly, that hope was crushed. "I'll have to travel sometimes, though," Sarah added. "I'll be delivering important documents to Rick during his campaign. I won't be involved in the campaign itself, but I'll get to see some of the behind-the-scenes action. It's going to be so much fun." Once again, my heart felt like it was breaking. Sure, I'd overheard Sarah saying she planned to end the affair for the sake of having a baby with me, but it wasn't hard to imagine her falling back into it. The thrill of the campaign trail, the closeness to Rick. And if she does get pregnant, how could I even be sure the child would be mine? Rick and I are roughly the same size and build. Without a DNA test, there'd be no way to tell. My rage started boiling up again, but I forced it down. Now wasn't the time to let it out. Sarah and Emily had drifted into a conversation about her new position in the upcoming campaign, completely forgetting about me. I took the moment to compose myself. After tonight, I needed to start planning. Somehow, I had to counter Dave's political clout, but truthfully, I didn't have a clue how I was going to do it. 2 days later, the answer walked right into my office. "Your meeting for 2 is here," my assistant called through the open door. I glanced at my calendar and saw no appointment scheduled. Before I could respond, she stepped into my office. It was Lisa Foster. "Hey, John," she greeted me with a smile as she entered. Her long blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, and she wore a light sundress that perfectly highlighted her legs, with strappy sandals wrapping up to her knees. The neckline was modest, no cleavage showing, but the fabric clung to her chest just enough to hint at what was underneath. 2 thin straps held up the dress, leaving her arms bare. I was momentarily speechless as I watched her move toward me. "I hope you don't mind," Lisa started, closing the door behind her. "I told your assistant we had a meeting to discuss my career and how Sarah is working for my father." I stood up politely. "Nice to see you," I said, motioning for her to sit in one of the chairs across from my desk. After she sat, I followed suit. "What's on your mind?" Her happy expression faded, replaced by something much more serious. I think you know what this is about, John. I saw it in your face when you spoke with my father. I'm really sorry he's doing this to a good guy like you. I was caught off guard. This was the last thing I expected. What are you talking about? I asked carefully, unsure of what she would say next. Lisa didn't hesitate. That bastard, my father, is having an affair with your wife. The bluntness of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. Did you just find out? Lisa asked softly. I nodded. I'm really sorry, she said. How did you find out? I managed to ask. 3 months ago, she admitted. I'm not sure how long it's been going on, but I found out in February. One Friday, I came home early, and they were having one of their meetings at our house. I had been out for a late lunch with a friend from school, and I stopped by the house to drop off my stuff and say hi. Dad asked when I'd be home, and I told him it wouldn't be until after dinner. But my friend got sick and couldn't make it, so I grabbed a snack and went back home. That's when I saw them, my dad and Sarah, in the jacuzzi. I took pictures, even filmed them running naked into the house. There was at least a foot of snow on the ground. You took pictures of your dad? I asked, shocked. My mind immediately wondered if I could get my hands on those photos, they'd be useful for a divorce, no doubt. As if reading my mind, Lisa reached into her bag, pulled out a large envelope, and placed it on my desk. Here are the photos from that day, and a few others. She paused, a slight smirk crossing her face. Dad installed a security system at the house. The whole exterior is covered, plus some of the interior rooms. With the right key fob and password, you can access it from anywhere. There's a flash drive in there with video recordings, too. I was floored. Lisa had just handed me everything I'd need to not only get a divorce but to utterly destroy her father. Why are you doing this? I asked, still trying to process everything. The anger that flared in Lisa's eyes surprised me. Because he's a bastard, she whispered, her voice cold. I hate him more than you ever could. I stayed quiet, sensing there was more she wanted to say. After a brief pause, she continued. My mom met Dad when she was a college student. He was a young lawyer, working in the sex crimes unit in Salt Lake City. My mom had come over from Ireland to study. Her family was pretty well off, but they died in the Londonderry bombing. She came to the States to escape everything. Lisa's tone softened as she spoke about her mother, the accent of her late mom faintly present in her voice. Mom was dating some loser who beat her so badly she ended up in intensive care. Dad was assigned to her case. They met, the guy went to jail, and a year later, they were married. Dad's always been ambitious, and he got exactly what he wanted, a smart, beautiful woman with an exotic accent. And Mom? She got a strong man who would protect her. I came along a few years later. Dad wanted me to get into gymnastics, Lisa began, her smile fading into something more bitter. He thought having a daughter competing in the Olympics would boost his political career. Do you know how most gymnasts' careers end? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. They call it the 3 Bs, boobs, butts, and boys. I ended up with the first two. That's when Dad changed direction and pushed me into cheerleading, telling me to be the perfect all-American girl. I didn't mind too much at the time, I loved performing. But by the time I was 16, I realized I was just a pawn in his plans. Mom knew about his affairs almost from the start. He was cheating on her pretty much from the moment they got married. She begged him to stop, but she was too trapped to do anything about it. Divorce wasn't an option for her, she was a devout Catholic. Lisa paused, collecting her thoughts, and I gave her the space to continue. After a moment, she spoke again. Sometimes I wonder if her poor response to cancer treatment was because, deep down, she wanted to die, or maybe she even sabotaged her own treatment. Either way, I was with her in the hospital when she passed. The official story is that my dad was in court winning a big murder case. He even got the doctor to change the time of death to make it look like he was there for her. In reality, he was celebrating with his assistant in her apartment. The press ate up the whole story about how they met. Heroic prosecutor saves abused woman. It made him look like a saint. But the truth? He beat her himself more than once. I saw it with my own eyes. Why are you telling me this? I asked, needing to understand. Because you don't deserve this, John, she said, her voice steady but laced with anger. My father is a monster. After my mom died, he hid his affairs for a while, at least until I left for college. Then the meetings at the house started happening again, but not just for work. He also hosted charity meetings here. And he's sleeping with at least 2 other women from these groups. One of them actually thinks she's in love with him and is planning to leave her husband. Is that what Sarah's planning? I asked. I already knew the answer, but my curiosity got the better of me. Lisa shook her head. No, she just thinks it's a fling. They say power is the ultimate aphrodisiac, and I guess Sarah's living proof. I overheard her and my dad talking about some senator they're meeting with. So what is it that you want? I asked directly. To her credit, Lisa met my gaze without flinching. I want you to leave this traitor of a wife. I want to see my father's career crash and burn so badly he couldn't even get elected dog catcher in a town overrun with cats. I considered sending all this to the media or even the opposition party, but he has too many connections. I believe that together, we can take them down. Won't this make things harder for you? Finishing school, I asked. She tossed her blonde hair, unconcerned. No. My mom left me an inheritance, it's in a trust fund. I haven't touched it, but if I need to, I could easily pay for the rest of my tuition and still have a decent safety net. If your mother had all that money, why didn't she just leave? She could have taken you back to Ireland, somewhere your dad couldn't touch her. Lisa winced, her expression darkening. She was raised Irish Catholic. Divorce wasn't an option in her eyes, no matter how bad things got. She clung to her faith until the end. It's the only reason I don't think her death was intentional. Suicide is considered an unforgivable sin in her religion. I sat there, processing everything she had told me. It was hard to see anything but the truth in her words. Lisa wasn't trying to trap me, she wanted to ruin her father's career as much as I did, maybe more. And given the information she just handed me, Rick's ambitions were about to take a serious hit. I didn't think it was a setup. If Rick and Sarah wanted to take me down, they could do it through the courts without all this subterfuge. This kind of deceit was for people like us, those who were desperate. A plan started taking shape in my mind. I was going to need Lisa's help with a few things. If nothing else, it would show me just how committed she was to taking down her father. Alright, I agreed. But I don't want to take him down by splashing these pictures in the papers or dragging his name through the mud in the divorce. Lisa looked at me, clearly taken aback. Why not? She demanded, her face flushing with passion as she prepared to launch into a tirade. I stopped her with a raised hand. I didn't say we wouldn't destroy him, I clarified, but I don't want to be at the center of some political scandal as the humiliated husband. Instead, I want to target the one thing he's worked for his entire life, his power, his influence. And I'll have a nice, quiet divorce that won't attract any attention. Lisa blinked in surprise, then a sly smile slowly spread across her face. What do you need from me? I grinned. I'm going to do what I do best. Get me access to his financial documents, personal and for his campaign. They nailed Capone on tax evasion. Having met your father, I'm sure I'll find something. And if you don't? She asked. I smirked. I've got a backup plan. Over the next 3 days, Lisa and I were busy. She discreetly installed a keystroke recorder on her father's personal laptop and home computer. She also managed to copy the entire hard drive. We set up their security system to upload all records to a cloud storage service I controlled, with the physical servers located overseas. As for me, I didn't need to monitor Sarah's phone calls anymore. Thanks to Lisa's evidence, I already had all the ammunition I needed. I also activated a GPS tracker, one meant for parents keeping tabs on their kids, that would ping her location through cell towers unless I sent a command to activate the actual GPS. I didn't want her to know where I was when I started making my moves. I faked a groin injury the day after Lisa's first visit, which gave me a reason to avoid any physical contact with Sarah. Knowing how many women Rick had been with, I wasn't willing to take any more risks. Besides, I wasn't sure I could control my anger if I had to be intimate with her. I also made an appointment with a doctor to get tested for STDs. The initial tests came back negative, but I knew some things, like HIV, could take months to show up. Sarah was annoyed and frustrated as she left for the conference in Seattle, her last day with Rick. No wonder she had been so eager for the trip. The problem was, as much as I hated her betrayal, a part of me still loved her. I knew I could never trust her again, but love doesn't just vanish overnight. Still, I couldn't stand the thought of being close to her after everything I'd learned. It was Thursday morning, and Sarah stood by the front door with her bag packed, waiting for Rick and the junior lawyer from their office who'd be traveling with them. I wondered if the kid had any idea he was just their cover. "So, I'll be back Sunday afternoon," Sarah said as she walked over to me after leaving her bag by the door. I sat at the table with my back to her, sipping coffee. She wrapped her arms around me from behind and leaned down until her lips were right next to my ear. "I hope you're feeling better when I get back," she whispered, her voice full of seductive promise. "We've got a baby to make." Her tone and scent transported me back to simpler times, and for a moment, I wanted to break down and cry. But I held it together. "I'll keep icing it," I told her, gently stroking her hand and kissing her forehead. She purred. "I wish I didn't have to go. I'd much rather stay home and spend the weekend with you." "You could always tell Foster that something more important came up," I suggested, the words slipping out before I could stop them. By the way she looked at me, I knew she picked up on something in my tone. "What's your problem with Dave?" Sarah asked, genuinely surprised. "First, you were rude to him at the party, and now you're talking like you hate the guy." I forced myself to stay calm and shrugged. "Honestly, I've seen too many power-hungry jerks like Carson who think they're invincible. They act like big fish in a small pond, selling this illusion of power and getting people to buy into it. Take that mayor in Georgia last year. He was a big shot, stealing city funds and sleeping with 3 married women. Now he's sitting in federal prison for 10 years, and those women? Divorced and humiliated. Carson gives me the same vibe. If he makes it to Washington, he'll probably start seducing interns within a week. And when his car inevitably crashes, I don't want to be anywhere near it." Emily looked at me, stunned. She'd heard me rant about corrupt officials before, but I'd never put Carson in the same category. Maybe I should have kept quiet, but it felt good to finally say it out loud. Even though our marriage was falling apart, I still felt the need to warn Emily. As much as she hurt me, I still loved her, even if trust was no longer on the table. "Tom, that's awful. What you said about Dave," Emily protested. "He's a good man who's done so much for this district. He's not like that." I could hear a pleading tone in her voice, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. But before she could say more, a car horn sounded from outside. Dave had arrived. Emily sighed in frustration and glanced at me, her expression shifting from regret to a flicker of fear. "I'll be back in 4 days," she said softly. "We can talk more then. But be ready, love, we've got a family to start." She wrapped her arms around me and kissed me passionately. I kissed her back, just as passionately. Have a good trip, she whispered. I love you. I love you too, I replied as she grabbed her bag and headed to the front door. Bye, honey, she called over her shoulder. Goodbye, Emily, I said as I closed the door behind her. 30 minutes later, I was on my way to the train station, headed for the city. Sarah and I had an appointment with the FBI. Turns out, I didn't need much prep work. Dave Carson's embezzlement tactics were smart, but not exactly genius level. Sarah and I met at her off-campus apartment to go over the documents she'd pulled from his computer. The methods were fairly standard. From what I could tell, he had stashed about $1.3 million in an offshore account, at least that's what had been transferred there. Whether the money was still in the account was unclear since we didn't have those records. A lot of this cash came from small donors, the kind that wouldn't raise red flags with the IRS. But I started wondering why people from out of state were donating to the DA's campaign. After some digging, I traced a few donations back to defendants whose cases had been either dismissed or resulted in suspiciously lenient plea deals. But the real bombshell? That came from Sarah. She discovered that she wasn't Carson's only child. He had fathered 2 more kids with different women. One child had been born 3 years before his wife's death. Carson had an affair with one of his employees at the time. The other child, born just 8 months after his wife passed away, to an 18-year-old volunteer at the hospital where his wife had been treated. Carson was paying each of these women $3,000 a month under the guise of political research consultants. Sarah nearly wrecked her own apartment in a fit of rage. That red hair of hers should come with a warning label. By the time Emily and Dave left for their conference, we had combed through all of Dave's notes. We still had questions, but we didn't have the resources to dig up everything. So, I documented all my findings and scheduled a meeting with the senior FBI agent I'd worked with before in Salt Lake City. Sarah came along to help sell the story we'd crafted. She told the agent that after taking a forensic accounting course, she had become curious and decided to take a look at her father's financial documents. When she noticed some inconsistencies, she reached out to me, knowing that my wife worked for her father and that I had experience in forensic accounting. Gary, the FBI agent, was a seasoned pro. He could tell there was more to the story, but we handed him a gift-wrapped case, so he didn't push it. A corrupt prosecutor, right in his backyard, one who had just kicked off a campaign for the U.S. Senate. This was a career-making opportunity, like manna from heaven. Afterward, Sarah and I caught a cab back to her apartment since she had a late class. I headed to Union Station to catch my train home. On the way, I mulled over the idea of packing my things and leaving when Emily returned. Gary promised to fast-track the investigation and at least get subpoenas for Carson's documents by Wednesday. It wouldn't be long before word of the investigation got out. Soon, the bastard would realize how fragile his power really was, especially when all the rats started abandoning his sinking ship. While I was still on the train, Emily called. She said she was checking in early since they had a big dinner planned, and it would be late by the time she got back to her room. I didn't doubt for a second that she had no plans to spend much time in her room tonight. I made a few vague comments, assuring her that everything was fine. She picked up on my distracted tone and asked what was bothering me. I just had a meeting with some FBI agents about a case, I replied. I'm on the train now, and I can't really talk about it since the investigation's ongoing. Oh, you're no fun, Emily teased. Don't worry, love, your secret's safe with me. We said our goodbyes, and she hung up. When I finally walked into the house, it hit me like a ton of bricks. My marriage was over. We had been together for 10 years, dated, married, built a life. And now, I was about to start over. I never imagined being single again, but that's exactly where I was headed. In the end, I just sat on the couch and watched the sun sink below the horizon. It felt like I was watching my life set along with it. I sat there for hours, unmoving, just watching. It wasn't until long after nightfall that I finally stirred. By midday Saturday, I shook off my funk. Sure, I deserved a little time to wallow, but I knew I had to snap out of it. Ironically, I found myself mowing the lawn again when a BMW convertible pulled into the driveway. I stopped the mower and watched as Sarah stepped out of the car. The first thing I noticed was her long, pale legs slipping out from the driver's side. She was wearing those sandals again, the ones with the thin straps winding up her calves, reminding me of ancient Greece. As she stood, her toned legs flexed beneath her smooth skin. She was dressed in a white, toga-like dress that ended mid-thigh, trimmed with lace that allowed a glimpse of her upper legs. The light, silky fabric clung to her curves and was just sheer enough to be suggestive. Underneath, she wore a bikini top that peeked through the dress. Her bare arms were dotted with light freckles, and her long, blonde hair fell in soft waves onto one bare shoulder, the other left exposed by the one-shoulder design. But it was her gray-green eyes and playful smile that grabbed my attention as she made her way toward me. I turned off the engine and greeted her. "Well, you look better than I thought you would," Sarah said, her tone teasing. "I half expected to find you at the bottom of a bottle or on the edge of a cliff." I snorted. "Last night, I considered both options," I admitted. "But I decided this was a better distraction." I gestured to the mower. "Have you talked to a lawyer yet?" she asked, her tone shifting. I shrugged. "Yeah, I saw one on Tuesday before they left. The paperwork should be ready by Monday. I also agreed to audit a client in Austin and leave on Tuesday. Normally, I'd be there for 3 days and then work remotely while I finished the report. But this time, I'll be gone for 3 full weeks." I shrugged again, feeling a mix of resignation and relief. It might be the coward's way out, but I don't want to be here when everything blows up. I saw the look of agreement cross Sarah's face. She knew that this whole mess would drag attention her way, too, being the daughter of a man like Carson. "Well, I'm glad you're thinking ahead," the redhead said with a knowing smile. "But then again, this is what you're good at." That smile again, playful and calculated. "Now I can plan too." "All right, here's my plan," Sarah declared with a mischievous glint in her eye. "I'll help you finish up your work here, and then you'll come over to my place. We'll have some fun, and you'll finally get to see me in that swimsuit I promised." "Sarah, I'm still married," I protested, feeling the weight of the situation. "And I don't think I'm going to be ready for anything like that for a while." "You need to blow off some steam before you implode," she insisted, her tone teasing but firm. "Besides, haven't you heard the saying? What's good for the goose is good for the gander." Her gaze was a mix of playfulness and slyness, and despite myself, I couldn't help but laugh. In one of those strange twists of fate that you couldn't make up, we ran into Anna later that day after finishing up the yard work. After cleaning up, Sarah and I decided to grab a late lunch at a nice restaurant. I wasn't looking for revenge, but it felt good to get out of the house, and spending time with Sarah was easy. She was sweet and fun. As we pulled into the restaurant parking lot, I spotted a car that made me pause, Anna's car. For a second, I thought about telling Sarah to turn around and head somewhere else. But I didn't. Instead, I did something completely out of character. After all my careful planning, something just snapped when I saw Anna's car sitting there. Without hesitation, I wrapped my arm around Sarah and led her into the restaurant. Once inside, I slipped the host a generous tip to seat us at a specific table, one that was somewhat tucked away but clearly visible to anyone passing by on their way to or from the restroom. I sat Sarah down facing outward, then took the seat next to her. She smiled when I took her hand. "What's going on?" she asked with a sweet smile. "Not that I'm complaining." I chuckled. "Remember how I told you about finding out about Emily's affair? About her friend Anna?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "Yeah, what about her?" "Well, her car's parked outside," I said, barely able to suppress a grin. Sarah let out a deep, throaty laugh. "So, I get to be the other woman. I think I can handle that." She leaned in and kissed me softly on the lips. It wasn't a deep, passionate kiss, but it was a kiss that promised much more, a lover's kiss. Our food arrived, and I found myself actually enjoying the moment. I wasn't thinking about revenge or the chaos that was brewing in the background. I was just enjoying Sarah's company. Her sense of humor was razor-sharp, and her ability to make accounting sound suggestive was, frankly, hilarious. As I glanced over my shoulder, I spotted Anna walking by. I nudged Sarah and nodded toward her. "Oh my God," she giggled. "This is going to be fun." Without missing a beat, Sarah leaned in and kissed me again, her hand finding its way to mine under the table. My hand rested on her thigh, and the feel of her smooth skin against my palm sent an electric jolt through me. Her leg was toned and firm, the muscles flexing slightly under my touch. I was so caught up in the sensation that I didn't even notice Anna until she started shouting. "Tom! What the hell are you doing?" she screamed, her voice echoing through the restaurant. "Who is this woman? Sneaking around while your wife's out of town? I thought you were better than this." I have no doubt the entire restaurant heard her. I pulled my hand away from Sarah's leg and turned to face Anna, doing my best to keep calm. "What's your problem, Anna?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "It's just a little harmless fun before Emily and I settle down and start a family. And could you keep it down? People are trying to eat." Anna looked at me like I'd slapped her across the face. "What?" she stammered. "Oh, come on, Anna. Emily's been doing the same thing. I'm sure she's having a great time with her boss right now, just like she has been for the past several months. So, I figured it was only fair that I enjoy myself too and, well, why not seduce the boss's daughter?" I added, my voice dripping with sarcastic cheer. I thought Anna was going to have a heart attack right then and there. I could feel Sarah starting to giggle beside me, so I gave her a gentle squeeze to keep her quiet. You knew." Anna stammered, her voice shaky. "I know that I've been playing the role of the faithful, clueless husband while my wife has been running around, aided and abetted by someone I thought was my close friend," I replied, watching as the color drained from Anna's face. "Leave, Anna," I said, my tone final. She stood there for a moment, frozen, before turning and bolting out of the restaurant. A few minutes later, we heard the unmistakable sound of her car peeling out of the parking lot. "Well, that was fun while it lasted," Sarah said with a small laugh. I was really hoping she'd stick around a little longer. I couldn't help but blush at her smile. "You know she's probably on the phone with your wife right now," she added with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Probably," I agreed. "I give it 5 minutes before my phone starts ringing. But hey, Emily's a good 5 hours away from home, so we've got plenty of time for dessert and for me to head home and pack. It's just a shame I won't get to see you in that bikini you promised." Sarah laughed again, a sound that made my chest tighten. "Oh, we can save that for another day." She reached across the table, grabbing my shirt and pulling me closer. "My semester ends in a week and a half," she whispered in my ear, her voice sultry. "I've always wanted to see Austin." I barely registered her words as her tongue flicked teasingly against my ear. Sure enough, 10 minutes after Anna left the restaurant, Emily started calling. I listened to the first few voicemails, her voice full of fury, accusing me of having fun with someone else. It nearly made me laugh. After an hour of her messages and texts, I blocked her number. I knew she'd eventually call from another phone, but driving back from Seattle meant she couldn't exactly borrow a phone on the highway. When I got home, I started packing. Not just for my trip to Austin, I packed up all my personal belongings. I had plenty of time, 4 hours since I'd last seen Anna. I was leaving the house I'd called home, possibly for the last time. After booking a hotel near Salt Lake City Airport, I loaded most of my stuff into a storage unit until I figured out my next steps. Sarah and I stayed in touch throughout the day. She had gone for a walk with a friend because her father was leaving furious messages on her phone, too. I ended up moving my flight to Austin up a day and left first thing Monday morning. Emily, of course, managed to reach me a few times using other people's phones. Her tearful rants were predictable. How could I do this to her? Why was I ruining her career? Apparently, Anna's public meltdown had drawn a lot of attention. Someone had even blogged about the incident, referring to Sarah and me as gamers in the title. My comment about Emily and Dave having fun together had made the rounds, too, especially since it was widely known they were in Seattle that weekend. It caused a stir in the county's political scene and within the courthouse. For the rest of the week, I tried to avoid news from Salt Lake City. I needed a break from it all. It wasn't until Friday that I received a letter detailing what was going on back in Sandy. Surprisingly, it was from Margaret, the senior manager in the DA's office. In the letter, she apologized for everything that had happened. She admitted she knew Dave was seeing two women outside the office but had no idea Emily was involved. Margaret also complimented me for using the law to get back at a lawyer, a bit of irony that wasn't lost on her. It had been quite the eventful week in the Salt Lake County DA's office. Margaret mentioned that Dave had shown up on Monday morning, scrambling to contain the fallout while vehemently denying any inappropriate behavior. His story? This is just my daughter's rebellion, influenced by her unfaithful husband. That's what he was trying to sell to anyone who would listen. On Tuesday, Emily was served with divorce papers, citing adultery. The envelope also contained photographs, DVDs, and a letter from me. Apparently, her scream of horror when she read it was loud enough to send Margaret and two other people rushing into her office. Emily collapsed into a chair, still in shock, and Margaret noticed the damning photographs scattered across her desk. In the letter, I explained that I wasn't having an affair, but I hoped she now understood how I felt about her betrayal with Carson. I made it clear that I couldn't stay married to someone I no longer trusted, especially knowing she had been unfaithful before. The DA's office was unusually quiet that Tuesday. The following day, Margaret was in Dave's office for a meeting when four men in suits barged in. Dave started yelling at them for interrupting, but they didn't bat an eye. One of the men told Dave he was under arrest. According to Margaret, the look on his face was one of pure shock. They slapped handcuffs on him and led him right out the front door of the courthouse, past reporters who had somehow been tipped off. I owe Gary a few beers for that one. At the end of her letter, Margaret apologized for allowing this kind of behavior to go on in her office. She even offered to help me in any way she could, saying I didn't deserve what had happened. I think part of her letter was an attempt at damage control, but mostly, it was genuine. Margaret was always the professional and moral person I believed her to be. My plan for a quiet, no-fuss divorce was completely wrecked by my impulsive prank with Anna in that restaurant. News outlets in Salt Lake City quickly picked up on Dave's arrest and the charges against him. As I told Emily, it had all the elements of a summer scandal: sex, betrayal, revenge, and anger. The media ate it up, and the story spread to the 24-hour news cycle like wildfire. Luckily, I avoided the worst of the media frenzy by being out of town. They couldn't track me down because I had booked a second hotel room, about 10 miles away from the one listed on my work itinerary. This helped me steer clear of the reporters. However, I did see footage of them camped outside my house, waiting for someone to come out. Emily didn't make an appearance, but they caught plenty of footage of my relatives going in and out. Sarah, on the other hand, got the brunt of it. Being the daughter who had betrayed her father, she was a prime target. She still had to attend classes and finish exams, which made it easy for the media to find her. Eventually, the school had to force the reporters off campus for disturbing students. To make things worse for Dave, the two women he'd fathered children with came forward, each eager for their 15 minutes of fame. Once Sarah finished her finals, she quietly slipped off campus and headed straight to the airport. The media was disappointed, though not shocked, when she didn't show up for graduation. After a while, the story faded into the background, only flaring up again when Dave's trial started. But he ended up pleading guilty to several charges, which earned him a 20-year stay as a guest of the federal government. Thankfully, his guilty plea meant neither Sarah nor I had to testify. After that, the story completely disappeared, taking Sarah, Emily, and me out of the spotlight. Despite all the chaos, my divorce went through quickly and without much hassle. For days after being served, Emily signed the papers. She sent me a letter apologizing for everything she'd done to me, and to us. She admitted that when she returned from Seattle, she had been furious, swearing she'd never forgive me for betraying her. But once she realized I hadn't been unfaithful, and it was all her, she understood just how hypocritical she'd been. Emily accepted the 50-50 split I had offered and simply asked that one day, when things calmed down, I meet her in person so she could apologize face to face. At the end of the letter, she told me she would always love me and wished me well. I later found out from her mother that she had quit her job and moved to the Midwest to live with her aunt. As for me, taking down Dave did wonders for my career. The FBI credited me for the forensic analysis that led to his arrest, and with all the press coverage, I made sure to be extra thorough with my work in Austin. I ended up not only finding the embezzler they were looking for, but also uncovering a second one they hadn't known about. My firm rewarded me with a promotion, putting me in charge of the white-collar crime team. And yes, some wise guy at the office dubbed the team Tom's Heroes. But the best part? They assigned me an assistant, a recent college grad looking to get some experience in forensic accounting. I've never enjoyed working late so much, and that bikini. It looked even better on the floor of my hotel room.